Imagine a world wrapped in silk, smelling of jasmine and rose water, where the walls are inlaid with gold and the floors are marble. It looks like paradise. But scratch the surface, and you find a prison built on the bones of stolen girls. Welcome to the Ottoman Imperial Harem, the most exclusive, luxurious, and terrifying cage in history. This wasn't a place of romance or idle pleasure, as the paintings suggest. It was a high-stakes arena of survival, a factory designed to strip human beings of their identity and rebuild them into instruments of the Sultan's will. From the moment a girl crossed the threshold of Topkapi Palace, she ceased to be a person. She became property. The horror didn't begin in the palace. It began thousands of miles away. In the misty hills of Circassia, the valleys of Georgia, and the shores of the Black Sea, slave traders hunted for the empire's most valuable commodity, beauty. Girls as young as 12 were torn from their families, their screams swallowed by the vastness of the empire. They were dragged in chains to the slave markets of Constantinople, where they were inspected like livestock, teeth checked, limbs prodded, fertility assessed. The lucky ones, if you can call them that, were purchased for the Sultan. But this luck came at a terrible price. The total erasure of self. Their names were taken. Their religions were stripped. They were given new Persian names that described their beauty or grace, like Roseface or Morning Breeze, reducing them to mere descriptions. But the physical captivity was only the first layer of the nightmare. Inside the harem, the psychological conditioning was absolute. These girls were not just sexual objects. They were trained to be perfect courtiers. They learned poetry, music, dance, and the art of conversation. But every lesson was underscored by the threat of violence. The eunuchs' men who had been mutilated to serve the system were the enforcers. A wrong look, a whispered word of defiance, could result in the bastinado a beating on the soles of the feet that left victims unable to walk for weeks. The message was clear. Perfection is survival. Imperfection is death. In this suffocating atmosphere, ambition wasn't a choice. It was a necessity. The harem was a hierarchy as rigid as the army. At the bottom were the carialer, the novices who scrubbed floors and served the higher-ranking women. Their only hope of escape from drudgery was to catch the Sultan's eye, but catching the Sultan's eye put a target on your back. The harem was a viper's nest of rivalry. If a girl became a favorite Guzda, she gained jewels, servants, and apartments. But she also gained the hatred of every other woman who saw her as a threat to their own survival. Poison in the sherbet, a slip on the marble stairs, a rumor whispered in the right ear, these were the weapons of the harem war. The ultimate goal was to give birth to a son. A son meant security. A son meant you became a Haseki Sultan, a mother of a prince. But in the Ottoman system, a prince was also a potential threat. The law of fratricide hung over the palace like a shroud. When a new sultan took the throne, custom dictated that he execute all his brothers to prevent civil war. Mothers raised their sons knowing that they were likely raising them for the executioner's bowstring. This twisted love into obsession and turned mothers into ruthless political operators. They weren't just fighting for status, they were fighting for their children's lives. This desperate struggle birthed the Sultanate of Women, an era where the harem effectively ruled the empire. The most famous of these was Kösem Sultan, known to the West as Roxolana. Kidnapped from Ukraine, she rose from a slave girl to become the legal wife of Suleiman the Magnificent, a feat unheard of in Ottoman history. She broke every rule. She moved into the main palace, she advised the Sultan on state affairs, and she ruthlessly eliminated her rivals. But her rise was paved with blood. She orchestrated the downfall of Suleiman's loyal Grand Vizier and even his own son, Prince Mustafa, to clear the path for her own children. Her story is often told as a romance, but in truth, it is a tragedy of survival where compassion was a weakness she could not afford. If harem represented the calculated brilliance of the harem, the reign of Sultan Ibrahim the Mad revealed its darkest, most chaotic depths. Ibrahim was a man broken by the system before he even took the throne. He had spent his entire early life in the cage, a set of apartments where potential heirs were imprisoned to keep them from seizing power. When he finally became sultan, his mind was shattered. He was paranoid, impulsive, and obsessed with excess. He filled the palace with furs and ambergris, and his sexual appetites became increasingly bizarre and violent. The most chilling legend of his reign involves a fit of paranoia. Convinced that one of his concubines had been unfaithful but unable to identify her, Ibrahim allegedly ordered the drowning of his entire harem. According to the story, nearly 280 women were bound in weighted sacks and thrown into the Bosphorus Strait in the dead of night. While historians debate the scale of this atrocity, the fact that it was plausible enough to be recorded speaks volumes about the absolute, unchecked power the Sultan held over the bodies of these women. They were disposable. One diver later reported seeing a forest of sacks swaying at the bottom of the sea, a silent underwater graveyard of the Sultan's love. The madness didn't end with Ibrahim. It culminated in the violent death of Kösem Sultan, the most powerful woman the empire had ever seen. As Valide Sultan, Queen Mother, to 2 sons and a grandson, she ruled the empire for decades. But power is addictive, and Kösem refused to let go. When her grandson, Mehmed IV, took the throne, his mother, Turhan Sultan, realized that Kösem intended to replace him with a more pliable puppet. The harem turned into a battlefield. On a night in 1651, the tension exploded. Turhan Sultan, realizing her life and her son's life were at stake, ordered her eunuchs to assassinate the great Queen Mother. The scene that unfolded was not a majestic royal death. It was a brutal, messy murder in the corridors of the harem. Kösem, an old woman who had outlived kings and wars, was hunted down. She was dragged from a cupboard where she was hiding, her jewels torn from her body and strangled with a curtain cord. The woman who had once commanded armies died gasping on the floor, betrayed by the very system she had mastered. Her blood soaked into the precious carpets, a final, crimson testament to the cost of power. The Sultanate of women ended not with a whimper, but with a scream. But the legacy of the harem lingers. It wasn't just a quirk of history. It was a mirror of how absolute power corrupts and how systems of oppression turn victims into victimizers. The women of the harem were slaves, yes, but they were also players in a deadly game. They adapted to a world that wanted to crush them, and in doing so, some of them became as cruel as their captors. Tourists walk through the tiled courtyards and admire the jewelry, the kaftans, the beautiful calligraphy. But if you listen closely, beneath the chatter of the crowds, you can almost hear the whisper of silk, the clinking of golden chains, and the muffled sobs of the girls who never made it into the history books. Their names are forgotten, their faces are lost, but their story remains a haunting reminder that the most beautiful cages are still just cages. So, the next time you see a painting of an odalisque lounging in luxury, look past the velvet and the pearls. Look for the fear in her eyes. Look for the shadow of the eunuch in the corner. And remember that history is often written in gold, but it is forged in blood. If you found this deep dive into the hidden history of the Ottoman Empire fascinating, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Join us next time as we uncover more secrets from the shadows of the past.